Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome Harrison Reed. He's a physician assistant. Today's KevinMD article is titled, 3 Ways Clinicians Can Unlock Their Career Potential Through Writing. Harrison, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So just first off, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I'm a PA by training, a physician assistant by training, and I kind of got my education in medicine at Yale. But my story kind of starts a little bit earlier than that. As you can tell by the title of the article, a lot of what I focus on nowadays is writing and publication. And that journey started, honestly, by being raised by an English teacher who kind of beat into my head the importance of clear communication, expressing yourself through writing, whether I liked it or not. But it didn't take long for me to realize that that was a pretty powerful tool. As soon as I got to college, I realized people were willing to pay me for my writing. I was writing for the college newspaper and then writing for public relations companies, that sort of thing. And then I realized maybe if I combine this with that expertise, that training, that experience that we have in healthcare, there's something really potent there. And so for the last several years, I've kind of used that as a vehicle to complement my clinical career, but also reach out and have a bigger impact through writing and publication, editing medical journals, helping other people along the way. It broke me into a career in education as well. So I've kind of seen it as more of just a key to unlock every door there possibly could be, rather than just writing for the sake of writing, even though that is something I really enjoy.
All right, give some examples or stories about some of your writing, some of your editing in the medical field.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the workhorse journal that I've spent a lot of time with is JAPA. It's a journal of the AAPA or the American Academy of PAs. I've served in a lot of editorial positions there, and it's sort of given me a front seat to view our profession and really the interdisciplinary healthcare world. So I kind of dabble in just about everything that anyone would ever want to write about because I've served as editor-in-chief and associate editor. So things that I don't really encounter in my practice in the ICU or in the ER, I still have to get deeply involved in. And that includes things like workforce issues and other things that affect the broader healthcare landscape, social issues, social commentaries, that kind of thing. And so I've really found kind of a home in being a jack of all trades, in that I feel like I can kind of bring out the best in other people, whatever their expertise happens to be. But it's also helped my career. I mean, I was 1 year out of PA school when I got an invitation to be on an editorial board of a journal, and I had served on other editorial boards before, but that opened a lot of doors because I was in my mid-20s and now I had a seat at the table with these people who had accomplished way more than me in their careers. And so being able to kind of have a voice far beyond what I ever really experienced working in a hospital, where, I don't know, I think other people probably feel the same way. You can feel a little bit like a cog in the machine. And, having that broader platform, like I'm sure really gives you a reach beyond what you can just do at the bedside. So, I got into research and have been able to produce original research myself. And a lot of those connections and mentors I made along the way would not have been there if I hadn't been out there in the world looking for other people that are like-minded and want to write and publish, but also just putting my ideas out there and see who picks them up.
What kind of formal writing training did you have before going into all of these avenues?
I didn't actually have any formal writing training at all. When I was at USF and doing my undergrad work, I was a biomedical science major, which, as a lot of the listeners here probably know, means you take a lot of science classes, and that's pretty much it. When I started working for the newspaper, I was suddenly working with all these people who were going to journalism classes and mass communications classes and writing classes. And a lot of what I realized was you can kind of learn through practice. And that's what I did. I just worked really hard, wrote a lot, read a lot about writing, read writers that I really admire. So it was definitely a self-taught art, I guess, more than a science. But there are ways that you can pick up skills along the way. I think things that really complement writing are things like statistical skills or research methodology. If you're looking to go that route, then there is a big value in formal training for certain things. But I think a lot of writing is just about finding your voice and not really worrying about the technicalities as much as connecting with other people and being able to really clearly express your thoughts.
So let's talk about your KevinMD article, 3 Ways Clinicians Can Unlock Their Career Potential Through Writing. How did your article come together?
Well, I always wanted to dive super deep into a topic. I want to talk about the nitty gritty of the thing that I love, which is writing and publication. And as I've traveled around the world and the country and gone to conferences and talked to people online, I realized a lot of people aren't ready for that deep, niche, technical discussion about writing and publication. A lot of people are like, hey, how do I even get started?
Yeah.
Or why would I even want to get started on this? And so that KevinMD article was a chance for me to kind of take a step back and say, this is why you're doing these things. You don't have to see it as a chore. You don't have to see it as a homework assignment. You can see it as a vehicle to really achieve things outside of the world of writing, outside of the world of publication. And so that article was an opportunity to kind of give people a little inspiration, give people a little motivation, and say, like, you don't have to love writing, but you can love what writing can do for you. You can love what publication can bring your career, your life, etc. And of course, I started the article out with a little tongue-in-cheek story about rebelling against my mom, which is something I love to do, even though I love her very much. I've often used writing as a way to kind of poke and prod her a little bit because she loves writing too. So I wanted to share that story as well about being a kind of a rebellious little brat. And you can read the article if you want to hear more about that. But really, I wanted to show people that there are doors just waiting to be opened. And I think writing is an excellent way to do that.
One of the things you mentioned earlier is that you wanted to make a difference outside of the clinical setting, perhaps instead of one-to-one, one-to-many. So give an example, share a story about how your writing really did move the needle outside of the clinical space.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in the past few years, there's been, a little bit more of a push from me to kind of talk about the things that need to be talked about. I've done a lot more commenting on social issues that I felt important. It was back in 2012 that I realized, hey, I can actually speak about things other than pneumonia and UTIs and clinical topics. Trayvon Martin had just gotten killed. I was at Yale University. I had a platform and I wrote an editorial looking for justice for that murder. And so I took that as a permission, maybe self-permission, to continue to put my values forward when it comes to writing. Over the last couple of years, I've touched on a lot of those topics that really matter, especially in our profession, looking for ways to really address diversity and equity in our profession, which I think is very important, talking about mental health out in the open. One of the most recent articles I wrote was not really a clinical article or an academic article at all. It was a personal essay, and it talked about things that I struggled with during the pandemic, which included things like depression, things like drinking a bunch of alcohol to try to get through the day. And I think that kind of honesty is something that's often missing from healthcare. We're really terrified about putting ourselves out there. We're really terrified about discussing the things that really affect a lot of us, even though we're all having these similar experiences. Very few people are willing to talk about the darker side of things, the more vulnerable side of things, the more personal side of things. So I wrote an essay called I'm Okay, and it really addressed how we go through the world pretending we're all right when we're really not. And if you could pull the curtain back, you would see how not all right so many of us are. And so that essay pulled the curtain back. And I wanted to show people, hey, I'm strong enough to show you my weaknesses. And I've gotten so much feedback over the last several months, people really saying that it helped them and that they hadn't related to something in medical writing until they had read that.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier really rings true in that a lot of clinicians today have trouble finding their voice. And medicine in general isn't really a field that really encourages individual clinicians to speak out against the establishment and go against the proverbial grain, right? So, what kind of advice can you share with clinicians to break that mold, find their voice, and have that courage to speak out?
Yeah, I think finding a support network early on is really important. I was very lucky that I got a lot of affirmation early in my career from people who were very experienced editors at JAPA, people in the commercial side of writing and publication who gave me jobs as a blogger or as a writer or in their public relations company. So I had a lot of affirmation and a lot of support, and that allowed me to take some risks. It wasn't permission to be foolish. You can still hurt your career. You can obviously still have things that have a negative impact if you're reckless, if you're disrespectful, if you cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. but having some support around you that says, hey, it's okay to take a chance, especially an artistic chance, but also, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to talk about that subject that, a lot of the kind of whitewashing and sterilizing of our environment doesn't allow for. So I think having those people who are a little bit further along in their careers or in their respective areas of expertise giving you permission is really important. But I also think just honesty, and especially internal honesty, self-reflection is important. If you feel like something really, really needs to be said, then be honest about yourself and ask yourself, will you regret not saying this? And for me, especially writing some of the more vulnerable things, I did think, if I died tomorrow, I would regret not saying this. I would regret not putting this out there in the world. And so that was kind of that internal support that I needed to find in myself. And I think giving yourself a little bit of that grace and self-reflection and saying, hey, is this important? Then go for it. Those are two important things. And then the rest of it is just putting the steps together. As soon as you get that first really meaningful piece published, that is such affirmation. And I think people are really just waiting to break through that first step of saying, oh, someone other than me or someone other than my mom thinks I'm good at this or thinks that this is worthy of publication and sharing. I think that's awesome. And that usually gives people a big injection of confidence.
So let's talk about those next steps. So let's say a clinician is listening to you now and is inspired to write and share their voice, but they may not have the resources that you had when you were finding your voice. What would you advise them to be their next steps?
Well, luckily, the odds are in your favor because there are so many outlets out there that really need your thoughts, your good content, your ideas, your expertise way more than you need them. So I think we have this fear that there's a scarcity out there. You can't possibly find a home for your work. But the truth is there are tons of homes out there, and there's a lot of different formats. There's more than there has ever been in the history of mankind. Places for you to put your thoughts. So don't self-defeat, don't self-reject early on. Look out there, explore. I have a ton of resources on my website. If I could plug that very quickly, harrisonreedwriting.com, just tons of free resources that talk about the different places you can put your work. So give yourself a little bit of permission to color outside the lines as well. I think a lot of people think if I'm not publishing in the New England Journal of Medicine, then it doesn't count. And that couldn't be further from the truth. There are tons of really worthy places to put your work, even things like social media, websites such as yourself, blogs, that kind of thing. There's a huge impact to be had there. There's a lot of people you can reach. And yes, it's great to have a really traditional classic publication pick up your work. But the real measure of success in my book is whether or not it's reaching people, whether or not people are reading it, whether or not it's having an impact and changing their thoughts or their behavior or their lives. So give yourself permission to really look broadly at where you can put your work. And then it just comes down to focus. Usually people say, I have so many thoughts. I want to just publish this article that says everything. I want to publish everything about men's health there ever is, or everything about critical care there ever was said, or everything about social determinants of health. And those are huge topics you could never possibly encompass in one article. So what you really need to do is focus, drill down, have some patience and say, you know what, what's the first step here? What's the smallest thing I can achieve first to give myself some momentum, and drill down to that little tiny point you want to make and make it well. And then you can move on and start covering more territory.
And I want to echo what you said in terms of starting small, because sometimes when you write for smaller publications, it's not your final destination, because sometimes those smaller publications get noticed by television producers, by mainstream newspaper editors, and then that can act as a springboard to a much larger platform, right?
You just need a spark. And the great thing is, a lot of people think when they put their thoughts out there, they've lost them. It's no longer mine. Couldn't be further from the truth. When you write something, that's your first step. You still own all of your ideas. You still own all of your thoughts. Even if you give someone rights to an article or to a book, you can go back to the drawing board and put more of your thoughts out there. You have an unlimited well of resource, that intellectual momentum, that intellectual ammunition to share. So don't get worried about, oh, I'm going to put this here and then I can never talk about this topic ever again. You can start to build a portfolio, a body of work. So start with those smaller things. Let other people see it. Let other people notice you, and keep going. You don't have to put one thing out there, sit back and wait for the world to come and kneel before you, because it's probably not going to happen. But when you take that second chance or that third chance or that fourth chance and allow the randomness of the world to bounce around a little bit, it, then you increase your chances of something great happening. And it might just be small, but I've had these awesome interactions where I put an article out there, I post it on LinkedIn or on Instagram, and one person comes forward and says, "Hey, I saw that and I want to work with you." It didn't change my life, but it led to a great interaction I wouldn't have otherwise had. And if you add enough of those up, you do change your life. You do have this big impact. You do see noticeable change. And that's kind of what you're going for is slow, steady momentum building over a period of time. I think we have this urge to have instant gratification and have things blow up and go viral. But the truth is you're usually building momentum over a series of years throughout your career. But you can't start building that momentum unless you do that first thing or that second thing or that third thing.
We're talking to Harrison Reed. He's a physician assistant. Today's KevinMD article is titled 3 Ways Clinicians Can Unlock Their Career Potential Through Writing. Harrison, tell us some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience.
Yeah, I think that one of the points I would make is I know a lot of you out there are feeling burned out, or you're feeling you want to make a bigger impact, or you're feeling you want some more diversity in your life as far as what you do with your energies. You want to see that go further. And writing and publication is an excellent way to start to realize those things, to start to open other doors, to start to see an impact you might not feel in the daily grind, even though I know you are making an impact in your daily grind. So I want to just encourage people that it can be the cure for what ails you, and that you have to kind of give it a chance to work. I think another point I would make again is just that you're probably your own biggest critic. You're probably your own biggest opponent and your own biggest obstacle. I know in my profession, we see that a lot of people don't publish ever in their entire careers, even when they hold faculty positions. And the fact of the matter is most of them just haven't tried. The bar is a little bit lower than you think it is, but you have to give yourself permission to try it. And the third thing is I just want to thank everyone who does write and publish and put their thoughts out there. It's a vulnerable thing to do. It's really a difficult thing to do, but it makes the world such a better place. I love when I read an article and I think, wow, somebody put a lot of effort into this and I loved it, and it is going to change my practice, or it's going to make me think about that all day, or it just made me smile. Those things matter. So don't give up if you're doing that. Even if you don't feel like you're going viral, or you don't feel like you have this big swell of support behind you, you really do. The people who read it don't always reach out, but it does matter to them.
Harrison, thank you so much for sharing your perspective, time, and insight. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.